Hello, everyone, and welcome to the InCust Review, What Great Schools Do. This podcast is designed to inform educators, policymakers, and school communities about the research-based practices, policies, and procedures that make great urban schools, well, simply put, great. I'm your host, Dr. Deborah McLaren, Executive Coach for InCust. Today, I'm thrilled to have as our guest, Cara Riggs. Welcome, Cara.
Thank you, Deborah. It's so nice to be here with you.
Well, Cara, first of all, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what your role is or role was in education, and a little bit about what you're currently doing.
Okay. I actually have been a teacher since the second grade. I was that kid in my second grade classroom that loved her teacher so much that she wanted to be like her when she grew up. And I had these wonderful parents that nurtured that early recognition of what I was going to be when I grew up. And, you know, my mom would take me to garage sales, and we had an empty cement block classroom in our basement. And so that was my classroom. And so at those garage sales, we'd pick up desks, we'd pick up coffee tables and chairs, whatever helped make the atmosphere look like a classroom.
Did you have students?
I had pretend students, and then I had neighborhood kids that loved to come play school until they wanted to be the teacher, and then they had to go home. But I, back to that garage sale thing, I finally hit the mother lode with that classroom when I ran into, at a garage sale, a broken down, some of our listeners won't even know what I'm talking about, overhead projector.
Oh, my goodness.
It didn't work, but I pretended that it worked.
Oh, my goodness.
So I literally have been an educator since second grade, and I never strayed from that, wanting to be a teacher. So my background is I became a teacher at the high school where I went in Omaha, and I taught English there. I'm sorry, I did my student teaching there. But then I became a high school English teacher, and then I became an assistant principal at that high school. So I was there for 15 years. And then after that, I became a middle school principal, where my superintendent called and said, "Hey, Cara, I need you to be the principal at this middle school." And I said, "Wait a minute, isn't that in the suburbs of our district?" And he said, "Yes, it is." I go, "Well, first of all, I don't know anything about middle school. I'm a high school girl. And second of all, I like the inner city thing." And he said, "I know you do. That's why I need you to go over there, because we're going to turn it into a magnet school and recruit from the other side of the city." So I was there for 9 years as a middle school principal, and we created this visual and performing arts and dual language middle school. And then had the same, you will become a high school principal now. And so I then went over to a high school in the inner city that I would recruit the middle schoolers that I had been with to come over to that high school. And it was a visual performing arts school.
And so this was all in Omaha, Nebraska?
Yes, all in Omaha, 30 years.
Okay. Well, I think, one of the things that is resonating with me is when you talked about being recruited or tapped on the shoulder by someone. And I know that for me, I was not interested in being a principal. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even a teacher to start with. I had another career, and I was tapped on the shoulder to go into leadership. One of the things that I share with those that I work with now to coach and mentor is I say, one of the best things that you can do is actually learn how things work in schools in different environments.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go from one environment to another, you gain a lot of knowledge, and you also can see either how things should be or how things shouldn't be.
Right. I mean, you actually get examples of leaders that you want to be like someday, and then you get some non-examples as well, or what you'll take to your school as values. So yes, definitely those people that we're surrounded by on the way there are important.
So I know that you are one of the executive coaches for InCust, or our National Center for Urban Schools Transformation. Tell us a little bit about what you do as an executive coach for InCust.
Okay. So I moved from Omaha to San Diego in 2014 I actually had been here in January, and I went to the Title I conference here in San Diego, and I listened to a session where Dr. Joe Johnson, our founding director, was the keynote in that particular session. So I stood in a long line to visit with him afterwards, and I said, and it was a long line, but I stayed because I just was so enamored by the work that NCUS does. And I finally got up to the front of the line and I said, I'm moving here in July and I want to work for you. And he said, well, give me a call when you get here. So I did. And he happened to have an executive coaching position open at that time. And I started then. So back to your question about what I do with NCUS. I've had such opportunities to coach leaders and teachers, but mostly leaders in struggling schools that are wanting to hear our research of what happens in these high-performing schools that we study around the country. And so it depends on the, it could be an A+ group where we've got a cohort of leaders that we coach and visit their schools and do walkthroughs. We also in California, as you know, have a process where new administrators have to clear their credential. And so we've taken that on, and I've had hundreds of young leaders that I've been able to mentor. And I think about how important that is for a young leader to have someone, even a veteran leader, to have someone to listen to them and to be their safe person. And then, of course, what we do is share those practices that we see in high-performing schools.
It's so important. I look back to when I first started as a principal in 2004, and I look back on that time and who those people were that were my go-tos, because this job sometimes as a principal of a school can be very lonely simply because there's a lot of information that's shared with you, or things that you learn or that you see or that you have to deal with that you aren't able to talk to anyone about. Mm-hmm. And it's important for you to have a go-to or somebody that you can bounce ideas off of and make sure that you're on the right track when you're working in this way. So you brought that to my mind when you talked about mentoring others. It's something that now I have, too, the opportunity to do as an executive coach with NCUS.
And I'm sure that you found, like I have, that the people that we coach are so grateful that our experience has been in the boots as well.
Yes.
We're not just researchers. We actually have done the job. Our team at NCUS has such a range of background in education, from principals to superintendents to district leaders. And, everybody I just learn from all of you all the time.
Well, I, too, am continuing to learn. And it's really quite it's quite a thrilling experience to be able to think back to the things you've learned and done over time and share your experiences with others, or support others in what they're going through, knowing that you had your journey as well.
Yes.
So talk to us about some of the key findings that NCUS has learned about what successful urban schools do.
Well, when you ask that question, I think all the way up to the curb of a school that's a high-performing school that we've visited. And when I say up to the curb, you get out of your car, you go to the curb, and the principals are there greeting their school community every single morning. There are just so many things that we see in all of these buildings. So this immediately when kids get out of bed in their car and go to school, they are greeted by the adults that care so much about them in these schools. The office staff is the same way. They greet you, and they know the families that they are servicing.
You're talking about customer service and the importance of making sure that the culture is one where everyone feels welcome.
Yes, and you're really going to stick out like a sore thumb if you're not like that in these particular schools. And then, the students don't want to go anywhere else but that school. The parents would do anything illegal to keep their kids at that school.
Well, let's not suggest that.
No, I'm not suggesting that. But it's just that important to them that
Yes.
they would not lose that spot for their child where they've had such good experience. And then the teachers, there is just no way that they would want to teach anywhere else because of the things that happen in these particular schools. And you know what else I noticed? Their kids go to that school.
Yes, that does make a difference. You're basically telling everyone else that this school is, if it's good enough for my children, it's good enough for your children.
Yeah, that's right. So some of the other things that we see in these schools are just real coherent strategies. It doesn't matter whether you get Dr. McLaren or Miss Riggs as a teacher in first grade. You're going to get the same strong, enthusiastic classroom where your kid's going to be excited about learning. So that coherence amongst all the grade levels, because they're collaborative and they study those standards that they're teaching down to the core of them, and they talk about what that's going to look like, and how we're going to know that kids are learning and mastering these particular skills. And I'm losing my train of thought here.
That's okay, because I'm thinking while you're talking about this, it's reminding me of also the standards are, when we're looking at mastering them, the most important thing is that we understand why and how these standards mean something in our everyday life, like the relevance of it. And I know that Incust in the books on leadership and the book on teaching practices talks a lot about relevance. And I want to share a story with you of something that happened to me that helped me realize, and I share this with other teachers, but it helped me realize I wasn't learning the connection between mathematics in school and mathematics in the real world. And when I became a principal, there was a teacher, I had a very, very good teacher who was teaching fifth grade, and she was teaching on positive and negative integers. And I was scratching my head, this was early in my career, scratching my head going, why do we still teach this? So I finally got the courage to ask the teacher, I said, Barbara, tell me, why do we learn about negative and positive integers? And she said, well, Deborah, we do it all the time with debits and credits. I said to myself, oh my goodness, I could have had a VA.
Bill went off.
Yeah. And it's so funny because all that time I thought math at school was at school. And then when I went out in the real world, that I did math in the real world, and I never made the connection between the two. So it's very important when you're talking about standards, and the reason why we have standards is we are helping to prepare our students for college and or careers. Mm-hmm. These are things that they need to be able to be successful in either of these two pathways. So thank you for pointing that out.
Math is such a great example too, because even in high school, I mean, how is it that kids are still asking their teachers that big question of, why do I need to know this?
Exactly.
And that's the biggest challenge for a teacher, is to bring that relevancy to them. But anyway, so in these high-performing schools that we study, the collaboration that happens between subject area or grade levels is they are looking at ways to go deep with a standard rather than let's hurry up and get through all of them.
Yes.
And, I think that's really important. Sometimes we tell teachers that, in these high-performing schools, we look at priority standards, and we call them North Star standards. What are those big ones that if we can get kids to master those deeply, then they're going to pick up those smaller ones all the way around. And the teachers go, wait a minute, are you saying I don't need to teach all the standards? And it's not that. It's let's determine which ones are the big ones, that when they master those, they're going to pick up the other ones easily.
Yes, I think sometimes they don't understand the interrelationship of some of the standards. And what is the big idea, or what is the essential learning that you're trying to accomplish? Or when I'm working with other leaders, the question I ask is, what is the outcome? What is the outcome you see or that you want to happen? If you want them to understand how to actually use this mathematics, or how to actually look at what they're reading and understand that what they're reading is based on the genre, based on the author's point of view. And when you look at it that way, then you realize you're learning these things for a purpose.
Yes.
And I know that NCUST in the teaching practices talks a lot about the purpose, the learning objective, understanding what the success criteria is.
Yes, definitely. And, back to the schools, what they look like, what our research shows, we always talk about the foundation of everything. And that's the the positive transformational culture that we witness at every one of these schools. And everybody is challenged with that mastery of skills for their kids. And how do we get better? It's not, we've arrived. It's how are we going to move now even into a higher level? And what are we going to expose our kids to? So it's pretty phenomenal. I remember, Deborah, once I went with NCUST to a conference. We had a booth, and we had a map of all the schools that we'd awarded around the country. And it said, America's Best Urban Schools. And I had multiple people walk by our booth and say, you mean there are some? I mean, there's this belief out there that if you are in an urban school, that those kids can't even achieve, at those high levels. There's a belief that inner city schools, that urban schools are just not going to have these kind of results that we are so excited to say, you're wrong. It can happen, and this is how it does.
Well, I'm a product of the urban school, public school system in Chicago, and so I'm a product of that. So I'm here to say that our students can learn, our students will learn, our students want to learn, but it's important for us to make sure that we understand how best to meet those needs. So I know a lot of the other work that NCUST does is work around culture and understanding the different ways in which culture impacts the learning of students. So in light of all that is going on in regard to what is and isn't allowed to be taught in our schools, how do you think social change happens? Are these changes affecting the work NCUST does?
I think that it's that's affecting a little bit the work that we do, and certainly makes it even more important that we do this work. But also COVID, has put everybody in a different state of mind about the situations of their schools. But, this goes back to our need to focus on that positive transformational culture, I think. The more that we are creating school atmospheres where everyone is respected and feels valued and capable in their learning, that teachers feel respected and empowered, where leaders go to bat for their kids and their teachers, and are brave in their leadership. I think that's how we stay on the path of, making sure that we continue to make social change in small ways that can roll into bigger ways.
You're making me think about the California standards for administrators that when we work with administrators to clear their credential. And in the dispositions for the equity indexed, one of the things that I think I've come to believe is the most important of those equity dispositions is first and foremost knowing thyself. Like, we have to understand what our biases are. We have to know where our shortcomings are in order for us to be able to identify what we can do to support our students and their families. But if we're not aware of ourselves, it's harder for us to be able to identify how to support our families, especially when we're talking about major social issues. And we have such a variety of diverse culture. If you don't know enough about yourself and your own beliefs and your own sort of deep beliefs, as Zaretta Hammond talks about in her book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, if we don't understand ourselves, it's hard for us to understand others when they're not like us.
And that's really important to prepare teachers for that by having professional development that, allows us to dig deep into our hearts and see what maybe some of our own biases are. It also, I think, I was thinking about with this question is, in these high-performing schools, leaders ask kids their opinions. Kids are empowered to have their own opinions. And we don't just go to the adults for the answers. We see in those particular schools that they ask their kids. Their kids have roles that are important in sharing with the leaders of their school if they want their school to improve.
Yes, and I think that's a great way to teach responsibility for your own environment, teach it responsibility to students about, you're responsible for the future that you want to see and that you want to have and you want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you should have a voice in what that looks like as you continue to grow and contribute. So do you have a specific event that occurred in your educational experience that has affected you and affected what you believe and how you behave?
I think that, yes, absolutely, that probably the most impactful piece of my own educational path was being the high school principal. When I was asked to go over to this particular high school that was, really could have had a for sale sign in the front yard. It was falling apart. The neighborhood didn't want to send their kids there anymore, and they were not. There's gang issues in the neighborhood. There was just not a whole lot happening that was positive in this particular school. But every time I went there for a meeting or whatever, I always felt this sense of that the adults really cared about the kids that they had. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't afraid to go over there and make some transformation. But one of the things that I learned immediately was I started talking college with these kids. And I so often heard this, Miss Riggs, I'm just hoping to be the first one in my family to graduate from high school. Don't talk to me about college. And so, clearly they had not had the access that I needed to provide them in getting excited about careers and what they were going to do outside of high school. And so we really did a good job of making that place everything that kids never thought that they could achieve. When I got there, we had the very lowest number of students in the district in that particular high school. When I left, it was the highest enrollment in the state of Nebraska. So we really began to build the trust again of the neighborhood families. And, I asked kids a lot. I created this student advisory committee just for me. And it was students, and it was a range of students, not just the National Honor Society kids. It was the ones who would come to the meeting and look at me the first time and go, what am I in here for? She's in here. She always gets asked to do things. So you had to have a real range of students' opinions about what it was going to take to make their school better. And we turned it into a real college-going situation, too, where when I left the University of Nebraska, Omaha, I had the highest number of freshman students from our school. So that was exciting.
Well, that's wonderful. And we are very fortunate in INCUS to have you as part of the team, sharing your expertise and sharing the things that really matter. And what I think really stuck out to me in your experience at this high school was the importance of believing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think it starts. It starts with us believing, first and foremost, that everyone deserves excellence.
Yes.
And that everyone has abilities, talents, that they have a purpose, that they were meant to be on this planet to use for whatever reason. And so thank you for that. I want to just close by saying that the National Center for Urban Schools Transformation was founded in 2005 to help districts and their partners transform schools into places where all students achieve academic proficiency, evidence of love of learning, and graduate well prepared to succeed in post-secondary education, the workplace, and their communities. We will broadcast a new episode of the podcast at the beginning of each month. You can subscribe to the INCUS Review, What Great Schools Do podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbay Audio, and Raphonic. We want to thank you for listening to this episode of the INCUS Review. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Deborah McLaren, for the INCUS Review, What Great Schools Do.